Hi, my name is April Ju. I'm the producer of the podcast Until Everyone is Free. This is the latest installment in an open-ended political education series we're calling Beyond the Bill. Our goal is to take the radical political momentum of the Maandamano of June and July and sharpen it using a combination of theory and praxis with a Pan-Africanist perspective.
What this elite did was to occupy the colonial state. Amilcar Cabral was very clear. We do not want, he said, to occupy the colonial state. The only way to ensure our people's freedom is to smash the state, to burn it down to ashes, and to create new organs of popular power.
Today, we've invited Feroz Manji to speak with us. At the moment, what's buzzing in the airwaves in Kenya is Okiya Omtada's declaration of his intent to run for president in 2027. Kalonzo Musyoka, as well, leader of the Wiper Party, has also declared interest, but not generating nearly as much excitement as Omtada. Omtada is a senator of Busia County and, more notably, an activist lawyer who, over his career, has sued multinationals, government, politicians, and many others on behalf of the public interest. On this very podcast, we've already spent many hours helping people understand the structural nature of what ails Kenya, in particular working class Kenyans, from the defanging of unions to why multinationals get to do whatever they want here, to the sorry state of labor rights, to the IMF, World Bank debt traps, to the commodification and auctioning off of natural resources, especially those of indigenous communities, and auctioning off of Kenyan labor itself. Which is to say that it's much, much more than simply corruption. And as we stated in another episode, Parliament's entire budget makes up less than 1% of the national budget. So Omtada has certainly played an important role as an individual, fearlessly, but is a focus on anti-corruption measures and simply executing the Constitution enough to liberate Kenya from the root causes of its problems? And if it's not, is that a good reason to still not support one of the candidates who has been historically very antagonistic to the government? There's also been discussion about his right-leaning gender politics. For example, should we look away from retrograde LGBTQ policy and homophobic remarks in order to gain, say, a less corrupt government? Is that binary even real? Just throwing people under the bus turn a unified social movement into a series of calculated handshakes once again? For many in the movement who had wanted to think beyond personality cults and the promise of a pure leader, Omtada's proposed candidacy and the oxygen it has taken up, plus this sort of perennial cycle of dependence on individual leaders rather than complete overhaul of a rotten capitalist system, this could be seen as a bit of a disappointment. But still, it's very early. These are all important questions to think through in this moment, and fortunately, these questions are not unique to Kenya. We wanted to invite someone who could share a Pan-African internationalist perspective on these difficult dilemmas, such as how should we think about electoral politics? They do, at the end of the day, matter, but how should we organize within a context where its importance is perhaps overstated? How should we think about the issue of solidarity? So, for example, what do we lose when we throw women or queer people under the bus for a, quote, lesser evil and, quote, non-corrupt candidate? Today, we've invited Feroz Manji to speak with us about these things. Feroz Manji, PhD, is a Kenyan, but now resides in Quebec, Canada. He has more than 40 years of experience in international development, health, and politics. He's the publisher of Daraja Press, which can be found at www.darajapress.com, and an adjunct professor at the Institute of African Studies, Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada. He's also the recipient of the 2021 Nicolas Batista Lifetime Achievement Award from the Caribbean Philosophical Association, and is the founder and former editor-in-chief of the Pan-African social justice website, Pambazuka News. He has published widely on health, human rights, and politics. Thank you so much, Firoz, for joining us today and welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So let's just begin with elections in general. Today, in many places around the world, elections have basically become a metonym for democracy, which is to say, if a country holds elections, then obviously it must be a democracy. But of course, we know this is not true. Kenyans know that elections are neither free nor fair. Americans know that a candidate who wins the most votes can still legally lose an election. And Israelis know that their democratically maintained Jewish majority only holds because of ethnic cleansing and the disenfranchisement of apartheid, and so on and so on and so forth. So let's begin with this question of what is real democracy from a Pan Africanist or internationalist viewpoint? What are some interpretations from different left perspectives about how to approach elections? For example, do we totally ignore them and just focus on working class organization? Or do we kind of calculate and think about which administrations would be better to organize under or will steal less from the public? And then, if you have some time, maybe lastly, how did it come to be that the meaning of democracy has become so diluted and flattened?
Okay, lots of questions there. Let me begin with the issue of elections. Imagine people in a prison who are allowed to elect their spokesperson who can negotiate with the prison authorities. Okay, is that democratic? Is that what we mean by democracy? Okay, I think in order to really understand the position of elections and the nature of democracy, let's look at Kenya from a historical perspective. After the Berlin Conference in the late 1800s, empire went out in competing with each other, seizing land, killing people, raping, torture, and mass killings in order to grab land. And they then established a colony. They claimed that this was theirs. Okay. They established a colony and they set up a state. And the function of that state was to serve colonial interests. It was to ensure that any resources, any wealth that was extracted out of this place that they called Kenya was to the benefit of empire. And was also, because they decided to have it as a settler colony, it was also in the interests of the settler. Okay. So we fast forward, especially there were struggles all the way through from the day they first arrived. But let's go start at the post Second World War period. Mass upsurge in every part of the country. People have had enough of colonialism. Okay. We want to be free. We want liberation. We want to be emancipated. We are fed up of being considered as less than human. We want to assert our humanity. We want to invent what it means to be human. And movements began to emerge across the country. And an armed uprising took place with, amongst others, the Land and Freedom Army, the so called Mau Mau. And they fought an heroic battle, but were faced with, just as in the American smashing of Gaza, so empire used napalm, used bombing, used killings, setting up of concentration camps, tortured people, raped people, castrated people. The most appalling, I mean, it's all been documented. We all know that is what has happened. And by 1955, they had smashed the Land and Freedom Army. They had smashed all opposition. And the radicals had all been either eliminated or marginalized. That gave them the basis for now saying, what do we do next? So, what they did was to invest heavily in nurturing of a new elite which would continue to serve the interest of empire. So Charles and John Joe Jomo Kenyatta, Tom Mboya, all these people were brought together, nurtured, given scholarships, lots of money was spent to nurture them into positions. And Kenyatta, who had been locked up, was in fact one of the key denunciators of the Land and Freedom Army, the so-called Mau Mau. Okay, but then they bring him out of the luxury of his special prison and appoint him as the next prime minister, and then subsequently became the president. What this elite did was to occupy the colonial state. Amilcar Cabral was very clear. We do not want, he said, to occupy the colonial state. The only way to ensure our people's freedom is to smash the state, to burn it down to ashes, and to create new organs of popular power. Okay? But the failure across Africa has been this illusion that you can take a tank and make it a hospital. Okay? It's madness. Do you really think a structure, a judiciary, an army, a police force, an entire structure should be able to deliver for the mass of people? On the contrary, what was set in motion was to ensure that this elite knew how to rule and encourage them to get rid of the radicals, the Oginga, Dingas of the world. Eventually, even though Tom Mboya was a collaborator, he was killed as well. So was Pio Pinto, J.M. Kariuki, and so on and so forth. And the tradition of assassination, of elimination, of marginalization of anyone who is willing to stand up to empire was eliminated. Okay. So now what do we have? We have a prison, we have a neo colony. It's a continuation of the colony. The state has not been changed. Yes, they dressed up the army and the police force in the colors of the independence flag, but the function of the state, the function of the judiciary, which until very recently in our history was made up of retired white judges from England and Scotland as well. And we call this a democracy. What we were allowed to elect who our representatives in this prison? Is that the definition of democracy? But what they did, and this is, goes back to Fanon's observations of the nature of the neo-colonial state. He talked about it being Manichean, that is to say, it is binary. You have everyone in Kenya, everyone is covered by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Let's be clear, but the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came into force in 1948, the same year that the Nakba was committed and the Israeli expulsion of 750,000 people. It was also brought into place, implemented when none of us in what was called the third world had any vote on it. They were, okay, all right. So everyone in Kenya is covered by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all the subsequent. But the problem is our society is bifurcated. You have those who have the right to rights and those who don't. Now, take for example, somebody goes to Mathaiga or to Parklands, okay, and wants to enter and search somebody's house. They have to get a court order. They go to Kariobangi or to Mathare, they just go in, they smash the place up, they beat people up, they kill, they rape, they do whatever they like, okay? Because they have complete impunity. They have been trained as colonial police officers, as colonial army. That is their function. And they continue to be a colonial army. Okay, it's a neo colonial army. But let's not forget that that is what it is. In fact, liberalism was what gave birth to the colonies, the colonization of the world. Thus, neoliberalism gives birth to neo-colonial rule. Okay? So, what do we have? You have a population of a small minority of people who have become incredibly wealthy, not out of corruption. The system is not broken. The system's made that way. Okay? Everyone blames the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank for this. Bullshit. Our leaders actually colluded and proposed it. If you go back to the Ngethwa report that before Moy came into place, that was about the introduction of structural adjustment, austerity in Kenya. Okay, so these were homegrown. It's nonsense. The elite understood that by colluding with empire, it would be able to accumulate at a rate unprecedented in the previous period. That's why people have become incredibly rich at the expense of the majority who've become incredibly poor. Go to any of the settlements and you'll see what conditions people live under. Lucky if they've got to get a toilet even. Some NGO will be making a fortune from grants and so on by setting up these toilets, and they even make people pay for having a shit. I mean, for goodness sake, yeah. But that is the state as I see that we are in. So now you have competitions. Some people who are so called progressive, even though they have no time for women or for LGBT people, etc. Oh, we can represent you in this prison because it is still run by empire. For God's sake, Kenya has American forces, armed forces resident in Kenya. The coast, it has ships. The whole of the Indian Ocean strategy for the America is based in Kenya. The British troops have never left Kenya. Now, you tell me which of these candidates who are standing for elections are talking about removing these bastards, removing them from us. They are foreign troops. It's an occupied territory. It still is an occupied territory. Why do we not have the courage shown by Mali, by Burkina Faso, by Niger, and now by Chad, who've chucked out the French troops? Why do our candidates not speak about that? Why do they not speak about the transnational corporations that are exploiting the country? All the mining and so on, how the entire infrastructure is built to be extractive and it is exploitative. And the tradition set up under colonialism, whereby some people are considered to be human and others not, is a continuity from the colonial tradition. Okay, so you have the vast majority of people considered less than human. But what these uprisings have shown is that you cannot crush humans' desire to be free, the humans' desire to collectively have an emancipatory agenda, that everyone should be able to be free, to be creative, to be able to do all what humans. And so, what I've seen on the streets happening is a passion not only for a reassertion of their humanity, but the invention of what it means to be human. I've seen how there is collective decision making. I've seen how they've supported those. Anyone gets arrested, people are out on the streets to demand justice. There is that collective spirit, but there's still this illusion that we can solve this problem by having another election. This election's not going to solve that problem. Okay, So the question is, what do we mean by democracy? And that's really important to look at it historically. When democracy was established in the United States, only white male slave owners were allowed to participate. Okay? Ever since then, every concession that has been made has been a result of mass struggles. Women have organized to demand their vote. People have organized in that way. And it's always been given reluctantly. And when they get the opportunity, they reverse it. They revert. They read all kinds of obstacles. You're too poor. You're too uneducated. And the problem with the left, I think, has been that it fails to understand that people can think, and not only can think emancipatory thoughts, that it is possible for them, and that the cry of humans is for self-determination, to determine our future. Of course, we want to determine our future, but that is only possible if we organize collectively and say, how do we work together? How do we make decisions together? What do we produce? How is it produced? For whom is it produced? What should we do with the surplus? How should we organize our lives? And it has to be done on the community level, on the ground. People have to be able to participate in that. And that in a sense, what that is an appeal to is the taking forward Amilcar Cabral's idea that we have to destroy the state. But to do that, you have to create the organs of an alternative power. Okay, and that's what Cabral did. Two-thirds of Guinea-Bissau was under the liberated zones. I mean, do you understand that? I mean, women, peasants, etc., were all the ones making decisions at each village, whether it was healthcare, whether it was education, was what was to be produced, how much to be produced, when it's to be produced, when the school holiday is going to be, and even who needs to be armed so when the Portuguese troops try and take you, they can defend themselves. They created the alternate organ, and there's a very important book series of books written by John Holloway, in which he argues that if you remove money, if you abandon money, capital has no basis for accumulating. And what happened in Guinea-Bissau in the liberated zone was that the Portuguese currency was abandoned. And it was purely exchange, trade by mutual consent, a mutual aid kind of situation. They abandoned currency. They just they got rid of money. Unfortunately, after he was assassinated, the first thing they did was to restore the Portuguese currency. But there we are. It's just like in Kenya, okay? And so the question is, can we engage in a process where we nurture and encourage people to form collectives, to form ways in which they control? We don't have the police there. We have our ability to manage our environments and to be able to decide what is produced, how it's produced, and for whom it's produced. That way we build democracy. Okay, so what do we do with elections? Well, I think the only justification for progressive, for the left to stand in elections is not to occupy the colonial state. It is there as a platform to put forward progressive ideas, to say to people, we believe in you. We believe you can rule the world. We believe you can organize collectively. You can create the alternatives to state power. I will not occupy the colonial state. If I do get elected, I will seek everything in my power to destroy it, because it is only then that the colonial structure is eliminated and the possibilities of our human emancipation is really possible. Instead, what do we have? We have our police sent off to Haiti, the next colonial force. You know, I mean, what are we doing? And I haven't heard any of the candidates talk about that. Nobody talks about the illegal invasion of Somalia, which was against the Constitution. And all these people who talk about the Constitution, read it, because the first few paragraphs make it very clear that the president will have full executive authority. So so whoever you elect will be able to do whatever they fucking well like. Okay. And so, even the Constitution, everyone said, oh, we got a lovely bullshit. The Constitution has to be created and run at village level. And people should be able to construct their own. And the negotiation between each of them is a process which will take time. But we have to believe that people do have the ability to think emancipatory thoughts. If we don't think that's possible, then we will always be telling them. And unfortunately, much of the literature that I see, Communist Party and everyone else, we have to educate the masses. No, it's a question of listening. We need to listen and hear what the struggles, what the aspirations of people are, and then engage with them to see what the possibilities for achieving those ambitions so that they become those in command of the agenda, not some self appointed lefty formulation.
Thank you so much for that. I think it gives us an incredible sweep of context that helps us understand the long term power dynamics that frame the choices that we are presented and made to believe are some of the only choices that we have. Hi, listeners. We're going to take a short break right now and resume hearing from Feroz in just a bit. Hi everyone, this is April again. Welcome back. We are going to continue our discussion now with Feroz Manji. I'd like to ask you to speak about some of the risks and hazards of a political movement, in quotes, that is really just contingent on the leadership of one compelling individual, whether that's a martyr, activist, savior, or representative. Or put another way, what do we lose when we cede collective power to a person we entrust to lead for us rather than leading ourselves through mass organization? If you could also give some examples of powerful people's movements throughout history who drew their power from the fact that they did not have individual leaders.
There are so many examples of this, okay? I've mentioned Guinea-Bissau as being a really important thing, and it's too little studied, okay? Because there you did see that creation of that alternative structure of an emancipatory agenda, okay? But if you look in the early 80s and probably up to about 1985, what was happening in South Africa was an incredible process of people forming those kind of collectives and deciding how they were going to organize, how they were going to take on the struggles, what the politics, etc., were going to be, what the primary objectives should be, connections with trade unions, with grassroots organizations, etc. That was very real. In Algeria, we saw exactly the same thing. Look at what happened in Tahrir Square at the rise of the Egyptian uprising. It was incredible. People, the entire healthcare, childcare, feeding, everything was done not by the state, but by people organizing themselves. Exactly the same thing happened in Tunisia. And in every struggle, you see this manifestation, this desire of humans to collectively act as social beings to determine their own future. And it is the state, the colonial state, which always acts to destroy it. I mean, look at Nairobi. I mean, Nairobi is infested by the CIA, Mossad, MI6, you name it, they're all there. Okay? Why are they there? Why are they there? Because they know that the underlying spirit of all humans is to create the mechanisms for self-determination. And they're there to prevent it. And they exert huge amounts of resources to do that. And the reality is what we are finding now, and I think what's happening in Palestine and indeed Syria is a very clear example. We have reached a stage in the history of capital where it is transitioning into decadence. It's decay and has very little justification other than using violence to achieve their ends. And that's an expression of weakness. And I think we have to reflect on, do we need individual leaders? Or do we need people who can inspire young people, inspire women, we inspire peasants, inspire workers to have the courage to self-organize? Because it's not individuals who's going to liberate us. Freedom is a collective thing. It's only possible if we work together. And it is the power of collective action that makes it possible. It is never, never the individual. The individual may create the stimulus from their speeches, but it is the action of people that really can change things. And that's, I think, something we have to consider in Kenya, that I think there is far too much. And everyone blames corruption. That's every time I hear that word, I see this as a depoliticization, because it's saying the system's okay if only people weren't so naughty. Bullshit. The system is not broken. It's made that way. All corporations, when these telephone companies, mobile phone companies, what they charge you is on top of what it costs. In other words, it's corruption. Capital is corruption. That's how it accumulates. Okay, by exploiting or by rent, adding rent. So just like your landlord, does fuck all but makes you pay. That's the norm. It's not because he's a naughty landlord. It's because the system's made that way.
Thank you so much for that. You touched on some points that pretty naturally take us to the last set of questions I have, which is about some key dilemmas about what it takes to collectively organize. As the philosopher Olufemi Taiwo has written before, all politics are coalitional politics. And so the question I'm about to ask is a key one that underlies so many dilemmas about compromise, strategy, vision, and cohesion. So I'm just going to harken back to Omutada for a bit, but of course you don't have to be constrained to that one example. Since he hinted at his intention to vie for the presidency, there has been a lot of buzzing discussion about his conservative evangelical stances on gender politics, and specifically LGBTQ rights. One Reddit user online wrote, "We are all for social justice, lakini let's be realistic kidogo. In a country where 70% of the population are literally starving, while more than half of the budget is lost to corruption, these should be non-issues." Another wrote, "As a gay man, this is not the time. Nothing has done the gay community good like the new constitution, and Omutada is a fierce defender of the new constitution. Best way to secure the community's rights is to get him elected." On the other hand, others have argued that if, as a movement, you're willing to throw a group of people under the bus, in other words,
when solidarity is not valued, then there really was no movement to begin with. Both you and I know that the ruling class knows very well how to show class solidarity to one another. What now makes it so difficult for the working class to band together and do the same?
There's a continuity in this story, okay? Under colonialism, we were like childlike. We were not ready to rule. We were not ready to have freedom, okay? And when we started shouting and screaming and organizing around our wish to have freedom, to have liberation, to have human emancipation as the motive force of where we want to go. Instead, what we get the Kanu and so on saying, "Oh no, you vote for us, and we will deliver." And as soon as they were in power, it was now no longer a question of freedom. The word was now development. Okay, so we're all underdeveloped. So, in other words, we are less than what they are. We are underdeveloped. We are less than human. So we are underdeveloped. And now, what's the jazzy word? Social justice. What the fuck does that mean? Okay, where is our vocabulary about freedom? I mean, what's going on today in Kenya with the marches by women is really important because it is about the freedom of women. The word freedom has not been lost by the women's movement, but it's been lost everywhere else. Why are we not? We can have coalitions, we can have agreements with different people, so long as we all agree on what the goal is. If we're not clear that the goal is human emancipation, if you don't know which way you want to go, any way will do. And the really important thing about what's going on in these last few months in Kenya, there's a belief that you need to think before you act. But the reality is, it's only when you engage in emancipatory struggles that you learn how to think. And if in that thinking you all agree that it is human freedom in every form that we want to achieve, then at least we've got a common goal. Then, okay, there'll be arguments. How do we do that? What do we do? What do we do? How do we? Okay, the, sure, of course. And it's great because people will have lots of different views. And so then, that gives rise, it gives birth to new things. Okay, wow, that is what democracy is about. That is what we want to stimulate. But if we don't know where we're going, any direction will do. And that's the problem, that the idea of freedom has been completely eliminated from the vocabulary since 1963. And anyone who used those terms has been killed, imprisoned, marginalized, exiled. That's the reality. And I think we have a responsibility to reassert a debate about what does it mean to be free? What does it mean to reassert our humanity? What does it mean to invent what it means to be human? Have we the courage to think in those ways? Because if we do, then there's a logic to that. Because we know who will be interested in that and what kind of coalitions we can help form. And there'll be lots of different viewpoints about how that may be, but that's a really important debate. But if we don't have a common direction, it's nonsense. It's all about elections. It's all about corruption. It's all about nonsense. Human rights. What? But the vast majority of people don't have the right to rights. So let's drop all this crap social justice, development, human rights, all this shit. There'd be diversions from what we should be thinking about. And that's freedom. It's emancipation. It's about human emancipation. That's worth giving one's life for, because everything else pales in significance.
As a final tack on to that question, do you feel that freedom or human emancipation is in a very natural way, universally legible, that it's something you don't need to explain to people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's an aspiration towards a universalist humanity that everyone, whoever they are, can contribute to creating the conditions for their growth, for becoming. It's not about what we are, it's what we want to become. It is always a becoming. There is no end to becoming, but it has to be about becoming, not about voting. And I think that's really where we have to focus our attention. And if you look at the history books, the struggles of African peoples is not considered as relevant to the struggle for human emancipation. Yet, in fact, if one looks at the struggles that have been happening on this continent for decades, there is a richness of experience, a richness of understanding that we need to reflect on. Because it's not possible for people to elsewhere to liberate themselves if they are not able to consider the struggles of African people as a contribution to the struggle for universalist humanity everywhere.
Thank you so much, Feroz. I think with that, unless there's something else that you feel is important to include that we haven't touched on yet, I'd really love to thank you so much for coming on here and sharing this context, which has really just lit up for me so many pathways in my understanding of not only the how, but the why in a pretty fundamental way. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. We hope that this episode introduced some new ways of thinking about power and freedom and democracy. Please feel free to send us any feedback or comments, and stay tuned for our next Beyond the Bill teach-in.